Advanced Math ladies, this is lesson 1.4 part 2. This first part of the lesson is over completing the square, and the second part is over the quadratic formula. We did both of these in the fall, but let's do completing the square first. If I can get the pen right. There are certain steps in completing the square, and hopefully it will be easier this time. The first step is A, which is the coefficient of x squared, must be 1. If it is not, you have to divide by A. Second step, multiply B, which is the coefficient of x, by 1/2, and write the number down. Step 3, square the result of number 2. Number 4, add the result of number 3 to both sides. Number 5, factor the left side, and this is where we used the shortcut. And 6, solve using the square root property. Which was in lesson 1.4 part 1. The first problem we need to look at is problem number 38. Number 38 has x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. A is equal to 1. The coefficient of x squared is equal to 1, so we don't have to divide by anything. Then we need to take 1/2 of the coefficient of b, which is -7. I'm going to leave this as -7/2. If you want to make it -3.5, that is fine. We also need to move the 12 to the other side. So now we have x squared minus 7x plus something equals -12 plus the same something. Okay, the next step says to square the answer you got here. So that would be 49/4. So we're going to add 49/4 to both sides. The next step says to factor the left side using the shortcut. The shortcut is, you write the parentheses, you use x because that's the variable, then the number that you wrote down after taking a 1/2, which in this case is -7/2 squared, factors that side. If you don't believe me, you're welcome to FOIL it and see that you get the same answer back. I just don't want to take up video time for it. Equals 1/4. If you put -12 plus 49/4 in the calculator, you'll get 1/4. Now we're ready to do the square root property, which says take the square root of both sides. So we have x minus 7/2. We wrote the square root, so it's plus or minus. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 4 is 2. Add 7/2 to both sides. So then we have x equals 7/2 plus or minus 1/2. If you do 7/2 plus 1/2, that would be 8/2, which would be 4. Or if you do 7/2 minus 1/2, that is 6/2, which would be 3. And those are your two solutions. If you look at number 44, it has 3x squared plus 2x equals 5. They've already moved the constant to the right side for you, so you don't have to do that step. Then the first step after that is make sure that the coefficient of a, or the coefficient of x squared, is 1. It is not, so we need to divide everything by 3. So our equation is x squared plus 2/3 x plus, we don't know yet, equals 5/3. Now we're going to do half of b, which is 2/3. 1/2 times 2/3 is 1/3. Then we're supposed to square that, which will give us 1/9. Then we're ready to factor the left side. We use the variable x, and what's inside the parentheses here that we squared is plus 1/3 squared equals, and if you do 5/3 plus 1/9 on the calculator, you will get 16/9. Then we're ready to do the square root. The square root of something squared is just the something. We wrote the square root, so we have to do plus or minus. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 9 is 3. Subtract 1/3 from both sides. So we have x equals negative 1/3 plus or minus 4/3. So if you do negative 1/3 plus 4/3, that's 3/3, so that answer is 1. If you do negative 1/3 minus 4/3, that answer is negative 5/3. So there are your two answers for that problem. The next thing we need to look at is the quadratic formula. And the main thing I want you to know about the quadratic formula, and a college algebra professor would probably make you learn how to do this, but I'm not going to do that. I am going to make you know the quadratic formula, but I'm not going to make you do what I'm about to tell you. Anyway, the quadratic formula is derived from, that means we take something and calculate this from a quadratic equation. There's a difference in the quadratic formula and a quadratic equation. A quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c, sorry, forgot the equals, equals 0. It is derived by completing the square. If you don't currently know the quadratic formula, now is a good time to learn it. The quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, with the quadratic formula now written down, let's approach our problems, starting with problem number 52. When you're going to use the quadratic formula, you need to be sure that your equation is all on one side because that's one of their favorite tricks. So it usually helps to distinguish what A, B, and C are. A is the coefficient of x squared, so it's 1. B is -3. C is -2. Remember, the sign always goes with the number. So using the quadratic formula, it's opposite of B. So the opposite of -3 is +3, plus or minus the square root of -3 squared. Be careful because that means -3 times -3, which is a +9, minus 4 times A is 1, times C is -2. All divided by 2 times A, which is 1. You need to be neat when you write this because this denominator goes under all of that, not just under the square root, not just under the number. It's a part of all the whole value. So that gives us 3 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 2. 17 is a prime number. And 2 will not reduce, or 3 will not reduce away. So that is our final answer on 52. Now let's look at number 59. 59 has 1/2 x squared plus 1/4 x minus 3. So A is 1/2, B is 1/4, and C is -3. I know how much you dislike fractions, but you have a calculator. We can work through this. So x equals the opposite of B. So that would be a -1/4 plus or minus the square root of 1/4 squared minus 4 times 1/2 times -3. All over 2 times 1/2. If you do 1/4 minus 4 times 1/2 times -3 in the calculator, you will get the square root of 97/16. And if you'll remember, when we did square roots, you can split up the square root of 97 over 16 into the square root of 97 over the square root of 16. And then that's all over 1 because 2 times 1/2 is 1. So 97 is a prime number. So this would be x equals -1/4 plus or minus the square root of 97, and the square root of 16 is 4. The preferred way to write it, this answer is correct, but the preferred method is -1 plus or minus the square root of 97 all over 4. Okay, let's look at number 64. 64 has 3x plus 2 times x minus 1 equals 3x. Before we can do this, it is in no shape, form, or fashion ready for us to factor. So what we need to do is FOIL 3x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 2, and then we need to subtract this 3x from both sides. So we have 3x squared minus 3x plus 2x is minus 4x minus 2 equals 0. So A equals 3, B equals -4, C equals -2. So x equals the opposite of B, which would be 4, plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4 times 3 times -2. All over 2 times 3. When you simplify what's out there, you have x equals 4 plus or minus the square root